This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 8th of June 2021 and I am 2J.
I am JM.
And I am Ms. K. Again, in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. Daily Nation, fallen giants plot political comeback. The Standard, this is my defense. And The Star, get ready for fourth wave of COVID, WHO. Well, I think we'll start with The Standard. Let's talk about ODM leader Raila Odinga's defense.
Yeah, so in The Standard today, we're told of Raila's defense, or that he's in defense, he's defending himself. But I think we first need to understand what the accusation was. So yesterday, Rift Valley leaders, led by Turkana Governor Josephat Nanok, said that they were not opposed to the new projects in Nyanza, but that they want the president to ensure equity in development across the country. So my first question is this: so what? What is wrong with Raila using the handshake to his advantage? The second law of the 48 Laws of Power tells us never put too much trust in friends. Use your enemies. He says, be wary of friends. They will betray you quickly, for they are easily aroused to envy. They also become spoiled and tyrannical. I think the president has read this law. But hire a former enemy and he will be more loyal than a friend because he has more to prove. In fact, you have more to fear from friends than from enemies. And in my opinion, the handshake was a masterclass on how to properly apply this rule. And Raila has taken full advantage of the benefits of his new friendship with the president. And the two do have much to prove to each other. And there's nothing wrong with that. Why? Because the cost of the handshake was a promise of stability for Kenya.
Yeah.
My second question goes to the heart of why these Rift Valley MPs were complaining. Is there any truth to their grievances? So for argument's sake, let's look at two water projects that were commissioned in the Rift Valley and also in the Nyanza region. The first is the KIMWARER and ARROR Dam project, and the second is the Siaya Bondo water project. Both are brilliant projects, and they were set to transform the lives of not only the immediate residents, but those that live beyond it. And it really must be obvious where I'm going with this, because only one of these projects has become a success story.
Yeah.
So last week, during the Madaraka Day festivities, President Uhuru Kenyatta paid a visit to this Siaya water project. At a cost of 2.3 billion shillings, the objective was to improve access, availability, and sustainability of water supply in the fast expanding Siaya and Bondo towns.
Yep.
And it has done this and more.
Yep.
The project will provide water access to over 200,000 households,
Wow.
not individuals.
Wow.
So for context, if each household in Kenya is assumed to hold 4 people,
Yes.
this project will be giving 800,000 Kenyans clean and reliable access to water.
Yeah.
This is something to be celebrated.
Indeed.
And this is something that the president pointed to while commissioning the project, when he said, the fruits of peace is development. The fruits of peace are opportunities and eliminating poverty and lack amongst our people.
That's right.
But now when we look at the shame of the KIMWARER and ARROR Dam project, it's that it just never came to be. At a reported 63 billion shillings, not only is a majority of the money allegedly missing, but it's the residents who have to pay the real cost of broken promises.
Yeah.
And this was no fault of the president. The success and failure of projects cannot fall at his feet. Kenyans asked for devolution, and they got it. So I think it's about time that we should question our local leaders and give them an honest report card.
Couldn't have said it better. And I think we'll continue the same strain, inspired by The Standard. Jay,
Yes,
what do you have
yes,
for us
yes.
today?
So today I'm inspired by marketing, and I'd like to reflect on our political journey over the next 13 or so months. And that's right, guys, we are just 1 year shy of the 2022 election.
Yes.
And it's time we began to hold our leaders to account, hold a mirror against them, and we ask them, what is it that you're going to be giving us in the year to come and in the next dispensation? And so I'll talk about how well the presidential candidates are doing in building a name for themselves ahead of the 2022 election. In marketing, you've got what's known as the 4 stages of the buying process, meaning that there are 4 opportunities to influence your customers with content. Now, the same sequence arguably applies in politics. The 4 stages. Stage 1, awareness and discovery. And this is when a potential customer realizes that he or she needs something. And this is the current stage we're in right now. So right now, it's about building brand awareness. Raila is by far doing the best at this. He's doing brilliantly, just coming off a tour with President Uhuru Kenyatta in Kisumu. And just as you've said, and as a standard of today is reflecting, he's got so much publicity in Kisumu that for the last week he's been under siege from all these different politicians from different parts of the country. Step 2, consideration. Consideration is about interrogating and doing due diligence. And by around January 2022, we will be at the consideration stage. And then stage 3 is about the purchase. So in August of 2022, we will be making our selection at the ballot for who will be our next president, if at all we will have an election. And we'll have looked at all the technical details of these candidates, how much they are able to contribute to governance, their leadership qualities, their track record, and so on and so forth. And then finally, the final stage will be what we call advocation and reconversion. And you know, that really is about getting your customers to keep coming back to you in the field of marketing. But in the field of politics, this might not work 100%, because for politicians, you know, the idea here is to turn your voter into a multiplier, to turn them into a believer in your mode of governance, in your brand of politics. But that last leg, as I'm saying, it may not arrive, since politicians, once elected, they abandon poetry and they govern in prose with a firm hand. Now, the reason why, as I said, Raila is coming under so much siege is because he, on that political journey, is doing a brilliant job. Let's see if he's able to sustain it between now and 2022. The One Kenya Alliance, the Bearded Sisters of Court, whatever we will call them, they're really struggling to make a name for themselves independently.
I think you're talking about stage 1. They're all working towards building their brands.
Brand awareness.
But I'd like to talk about your last stage, reconversion. And I think that's what the Daily Nation was alluding to when it was talking about governors who lost in the 2017 general election, preparing for a comeback in the 2022 election from those who snatched power from them. And the description of the battle between those two opposing forces reminded me of something I once read about the classification of people and leaders. And I think I'd call that the pre-stage before branding, where I think Sun Tzu is the one who said, know yourself, know your enemy. And that would be the first stage. Before you can brand yourself, at least to know who you're up against. So in his famous 1953 essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox, Isaiah Berlin, a British social and political theorist and philosopher, divided the world into hedgehogs and foxes, based on an ancient Greek parable. And the parable goes like this. The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. Hedgehogs have a single grand idea that they apply to everything, while foxes come up with a new idea for every situation. So foxes have different strategies for different problems, and they're comfortable with nuances, and they live with contradictions. Hedgehogs, on the other hand, focus on the big picture. They reduce every problem to one organizing principle. Now, if this simplistic categorization is correct, then our governors, or any leader we've had, that are either hedgehogs who have one simple plan for the counties and the elections, or they are foxes who have many plans and they keep adapting and trying until they find something that works. And it is likely that if they were a hedgehog, they lost the election to a fox, and if they were a fox, they lost the election to a hedgehog. Let me give an example. Evans Kidero, Nairobi former governor, he, I think, was a hedgehog. He had one big plan for the county, and he called it the Integrated Urban Development Master Plan. But he lost the election to Sonko, a fox, who came with Sonko Rescue Team that offered security patrol, towing services, ambulance, and health services to the people of Nairobi, and undermined Kidero's leadership. So to win in 2022, the aspiring governors have to figure out what they are and what their opponent is, a hedgehog or a fox. Then they outsmart them. Now, I'm not saying that one approach is inherently better than the other, but the different styles work better in different environments and on different opponents. So, looking at our 3 headlines today, Daily Nation, Standard, and The Star, I'd go for the Standard.
I would agree. I think The Star brings a good point. I think the fourth wave is close. But yeah, it's a bit scary. So maybe
according to them,
that.
it's here, and Kisumu is the first casualty because of Madaraka Day. I feel like that's giving us a negative twinge to what was a very positive day.
Yeah, however, I think the Standard has a very strong headline.
That is, the Standard gives us our winning headline. This is my defense. And now on to our final thought. But before we get there, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the like button.
And now our final thought. This week is inspired by the 7 deadly sins. And today we begin with a book entitled The Age of Anger, written by Pankaj Mishra. So the 7 deadly sins refer to behaviors and habits that are considered among the most cardinal vices under Christian teachings. But ironically, the 7 deadly sins do not appear explicitly in the Bible. However, each of these vices does get ample mention throughout the Bible in different ways. So the history of the 7 deadly sins goes back to the year 400 AD, and the first person to recognize these vices was a 4th century monk named Evagrius Ponticus. However, Evagrius actually identified 8 deadly sins and not 7 that were, those things that you should really resist. But what happened is that 2 centuries later, the list was refined to 7 by Pope Gregory I. So besides playing a role in the compilation of the 7 deadly sins, Pope Gregory I also came up with the 7 heavenly virtues. And the Bible actually does validate both those deadly sins as well as those heavenly virtues.
Yes.
So the sins we all know, I think, are pride, greed, lust, wrath, gluttony, envy, and sloth. While Gregory's list of the 7 virtues include faith, hope, charity, justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. And today we start with wrath. And this is defined as uncontrolled feelings of anger, rage, or hatred. And wrath feeds on this strong desire to exact vengeance and is actually fueled by an irrational desire or drive to harm other people. And so this book, The Age of Anger, presents itself as a history of the present, a bit of an oxymoron. And the author's premise is that large parts of the world are retracing the past and reliving traumas and violent dislocations that Europe had experienced during its own transition to modernity in the 18th and 19th centuries. And this trauma, he explains, is being felt most by these people he calls the young men of promise, in the countries that arrived late to capitalism, late to globalization, and late to the age of enlightenment. And he targets really Russia and Germany as those countries. And these people and countries bought into the prospect of freedom and cultural transformation. But unfortunately, these became unachievable expectations, which predictably ended in humiliation and rage. And it's this helplessness, he says, that he believes can explain, in part, why we live in, as the title says, this age of anger. Yeah.
I think I'll continue from where 2J is left, and I felt that this book was timely because I get a sense that the world is angry. Protests in the US under the banner of Black Lives Matter, Trump supporters storming the Capitol, anti-COVID lockdown protests, the list goes on. And according to the author, the volatility and irrationalism of the present are expressions of widespread feelings of alienation, resentment, anger, and hatred. But how did we get here? So he says that with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the triumph of Western liberal democracy, the world came to uphold an ideal of cosmopolitan liberalism, an ideal of a universal commercial society of self-interested, rational individuals. This was a model originally advocated by in the 18th century by Montesquieu, Adam Smith, and Voltaire. But in reality, our democratic experiments have failed to deliver on the promise of liberation and shared prosperity. All we have done is exacerbate the feelings of frustration and powerlessness among the marginalized, the dispossessed, the persecuted, exploited, and discriminated members of our society. And the end result is a destructive psychological phenomenon that the author calls resentment. I've not said it as nicely. I'm sure Jem will tutor me on this. And the French word loosely translates to resentment. But the author follows Friedrich Nietzsche's in preference of the French word. For the author, resentment happens where, and I quote, the modern promise of equality collides with massive disparities of power, education, status, and property ownership. The persistence of resentment, I quote again, poisons civil society and undermines political liberty and is presently making for a global turn towards authoritarianism and toxic forms of chauvinism. In short, the masses are angry. They're angry at the system. They're angry at themselves for thinking the system could work. And when all else fails, the masses pick a target, accuse that target of being the cause of their frustrations, and direct their anger at them. And the target could be immigrants, it could be Muslims, or it could be the wealthy, as we have decided in Kenya. What this book taught me is that the social and political problems in Kenya are neither unique, nor are they special. They are our local version of a global problem. What could happen if to our country if this anger, we continue to fan it, is a concern, a cause of concern for all of us?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's that what populism is doing. I think this, rich versus poor, hustler versus dynasty, that is fanning the anger in the country.
Yes.
And it's a very dangerous road to go down.
Yes.
So we're living in an age of anger, and I'll talk about globalization. So anger at a more global level. So globalization has intensified anger and discontent across the world, and we've seen this in the last 50 years or so. Globalism has meant, for example, that local communities are no longer strongly held together. It seems as though the maxim, every man for himself, has never seemed more relevant than in our world today. That's what the author is telling us. Where once we had a social apparatus like the church that was a central plank in our society, holding people together and unifying families and individuals. Individuals are now lost in a sea of consumerism. The internet hasn't also helped this whole phenomenon. So as the role of globalization has increased, so the perceived value of national identity has decreased. Consequently, many groups have ended up feeling forgotten, and then they oftentimes, out of resentment, do resist. And often old national identities are resurrected with a call to arms, sadly. And the author gives an example of the so-called Islamic State, IS. And they have been attempting now for over a decade or so to establish a nation state in the Middle East. Here in Kenya, there's talk of a caliphate by Al-Shabaab, a region which has certainly, some of these places, Somalia has seen the worst side effects of, globalization and lack of peace. The same thing with certain parts of the Middle East. And so that feeling of exclusion, it makes people feel disenfranchised, disconnected, not have enough skin in the game to want to make the world a better place. And so for terrorist groups, it's an opportunity that they use to prey on young people, whether it's a ISIS or a white supremacist network like some of those that you might have in certain parts of Europe and the US. These so-called freedom fighters, they give individuals a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, and that's the sort of environment that nurtures the rise of demagogues. Yeah, and so in part what the author is predicting is that demagogues are consequently going to arise from this deep-seated feelings of discontent. So demagogues begin as agitators first, and they come in to promise stability during these uncertain times. And when people are lost or when they feel down by the establishment, as many have been feeling for a long time now, they look to strong men, even violent ones to some extent, to restore that feeling of control. Now, I've got to tie this all up with our President Uhuru Kenyatta, who has done so much in the area of building our country up. He spoke about the 4 legacy frames in Kisumu last week, and what the President is doing by restoring dignity, by doing projects that will accelerate our economy, by 10 times, is to lessen the number of disenfranchised and disgruntled people in Kenya, particularly in urban areas where there's so much desperation. And that's because it doesn't want Kenya to become a hotspot for resentment or a hotspot for rage. And those who insist that we are worse off economically than, for instance, we were doing better in the Kibaki years, a lot of people have been saying, anybody championing that right at the top, those guys are charlatans. And actually what they're doing is to manufacture anger, which, you know, the president is really trying to get rid of, so that people feel like they're part of this country. When people feel dignified, they have water, they have roads, they have hospitals near them, you know, then they feel like they've got skin in the game in this country we call Kenya.
And I have to say, we have to continue Project Kenya, because those people, those charlatans that you have, as you have called them, who are actively speaking against what the president is doing and rousing public anger, they're going to create the reality they are supposedly against.
Yes.
Today we had a winning headline from The Standard, and allow me to leave you with a quote. It is by Aristotle, and it's about anger. He says, anyone can become angry, that is easy, but to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy.